Okay, hi. So today I want to talk about publisher censorship. So this is a topic that I've had at the forefront of my mind for the past few weeks. I think it first kind of originated when I watched Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads tag on I'm Annoyed BookTube, the I'm Annoyed BookTube tag. And in it, one of the things that he talked about that publishers do that annoys him is boulderization. And boulderization is named after Thomas Boulder, an English editor who published edited versions of Shakespeare's works. While the book's front piece says nothing is added to the original text, but those words and expressions omitted, which cannot with propriety be read aloud in a family. So a lot of the time, the conversation is around banned books, which I think is an important topic. I think that both of them hold merit. But another topic that I find really interesting is the censorship of books. And I also kind of had inspiration to talk about this from Jesse at Bowties and Books.
Correction, Jesse's channel is now called Jesse on YouTube. I was apparently living in 2022 when I recorded this, so my apologies.
Recent video, I'll link it below. They were kind of talking about the nuance of reading a problematic author, and sometimes those are classics. And you kind of can safely assume that a lot of the classics that you're consuming are going to be problematic in some nature because of the kind of times that the people lived in and the general thoughts on different others of people. This is going to be a very rambly video, but when you choose to boulderdize or censor a work, essentially what you're doing is you're acknowledging that the book is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever it might be, anti-Semitic, and you are, as a publisher, choosing which parts that you have to erase in some capacity so that it can continue to be enjoyed for a modern audience. I have a lot of problems with that. The first one is that you're censoring language, and there is really heinous language in these books. And as a consumer of fiction or nonfiction, as a consumer of novels, you get to choose if you want to read a book or not based off of anything. So if you know that a book is really homophobic, you can choose not to read it. Or you can choose to read it and you can choose to ignore it. Or you can choose to read it and you can choose to have a nuanced conversation with people or critically think about the book at large from a historic context, from a modern context. The choice is yours. But then when these publishers change the language, they remove necessary context. They remove historic context so that it's more suitable or palatable to a modern audience. I think another thing that it does is it hides those things from a modern audience so they don't have to think about that. The thing that Jesse talked about in their video is Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie's book, And Then There Were None, which was originally called, it's changed its name multiple times from 10 Little Slur to 10 Little Slur to And Then There Were None. And what it kind of does is it allows readers to not have to confront the racism and to be able to comfortably pick up the text without having to engage with that part of its history. And that conceptually, it's uncomfortable that, I don't know how to express this well, but I don't like that you're removing the nuance there. And as a reader myself, when I first read And Then There Were None, I had no idea of this history because it was erased in secondary, tertiary, whatever publications. So I want to talk about some books that have been boulderdized, that have been censored by publishers. This is interesting. So Roald Dahl books, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Witches, and other works. So this is another part of the conversation to me, is sometimes books that were written for children have racist, sexist, homophobic, all the ism values in them. And in order to keep profiting off of these texts, they're like, okay, well, we'll just censor that stuff so that children can keep reading them. But just have children read modern texts, like just print and publish and advocate for these modern texts that might not have these things, that are, BIPOC authors, that are queer authors. But it's more profitable to go to the classics. So recently, Puffin Books is the one that edited these. And they said that they wanted to review and edit the book's language to ensure, quote, Dahl's wonderful stories and characters continue to be enjoyed by all children today. Number 2, the James Bond series by Ian Fleming. So this is the disclaimer that the book with its new censorship had. It says, this book was written at a time when terms and attitudes which might be considered offensive by modern readers were commonplace. A number of updates have been made in this edition while keeping as close as possible to the original text in the period in which it was set. And the decision that the publisher made was that racial slurs towards Black people will be removed, but depictions of other ethnic minorities, such as a Korean character called Oddjob in Goldfinger, the 7th book, will remain. So there is a line that the censoring publishing agency decided to draw, that this slur is acceptable and this slur is not. Which is interesting because now the publishing house has their own moral compass that they're following, i.e., they still want to sell the book and make money and profit from it, but they don't want kickback or pushback, so they'll censor the things that are going to be the most heinous sounding, and they'll keep the others. Another children's book, the Dr. Dolittle series. In the 1960s and 1970s, editions of the book began to appear with derogatory language and plot elements revised or completely removed. In order to make it palatable, you're literally having to change the plot of the book, which doesn't really make it the same book anymore. I think a very famous one is Huckleberry Finn. In 2011, a publishing house at a college replaced a very offensive slur to slave in all 219 locations it was used. I think another interesting thing about this is that when these words get removed, it's almost like people feel like it now makes it okay for a kid to read. This is a whole other topic I can make a video on, but I really don't like conceptually the idea of having children read classics in schools. And one of the reasons that I have for this is that a lot of the time the language is already really accessible. There's a historic context that you probably don't understand. There's so many layers of comprehension that your non-completely developed mind has to take on. And so it's like, I have to read this book. Now I have to understand the historic context. Now I don't really understand the writing. And you have all these layers that not all kids and not most kids are going to be able to sift through. And now you have to also acknowledge the racism that was prevalent at the time, and you have to critically think and engage with that in the text. Like, just read modern books with these types of themes at their core. I don't know. I'll step off that soapbox. Sometimes these places are choosing to change the text of living authors without their consent, which is another interesting topic. You go through an editing process when you're writing a book, and now a lot of books will have sensitivity readers to help you see things that from your perspective, your worldview, you may not see in your own text, which I think is a great thing when you're a part of that conversation. It's really interesting to then publish a book and for the publisher to then make a decision later on to edit your text further in a way that you did not give consent to and you are still living. An example of this is R.L. Stine. It began to be reported that some of R.L. Stine's Goosebumps books were edited. And he came on to say on Twitter, he says, "I never changed a word in Goosebumps. Any changes were never shown to me." Scholastic then said they were going to keep the language current and avoid imagery that could negatively impact a young person's view of themselves today, with a particular focus on mental health. Just publish modern books. It's like, I'm stuck on the capitalistic aspect of this. Another author that had their books censored in their lifetime was Ray Bradbury with Fahrenheit 451, which is really ironic because that book is about censorship. In the 1953 publication by Ballantine Books, it contained language such as hell, damnation, abortion. And without Bradbury's approval, Ballantine released a version in 1967 without those words in it so that it could be used in high schools. So while this happened in 1967, Bradbury didn't know about it until 1979. Bradbury had some choice words about this that I won't really go into, but it's just another interesting one where they are choosing to remove the language, and you as a consumer might not even know that a book that you are reading has been Boulderized. So going back to Agatha Christie, the latest edition of 1937's Death on the Nile, which is one of the Poirot novels, published by HarperCollins, removes a character describing her revulsion to children. This is interesting because I have read Death on the Nile. One of the things that I noticed in my reading of the book was the undercurrent of racism throughout it. So from my recollection, there was never really, their characters weren't saying racist things. This takes place on the Nile, and it's on a yacht or whatever, like a cruise, I don't know. And it is a closed circle mystery. Basically, all the characters that are talking, that have any, that might be the killer, they're all white. And everyone who keeps the ship running is a person of color, and they're so unacknowledged in the text that there's no indication that they could ever even be the killer because they weren't given any autonomy in the text. Like it was like, oh yeah, there's all these people that are basically acting as puppets that are literally just providing the food, providing the resources to the white cast that's on the boat. So it's really interesting because they decided to edit something, a view of a child, but like that book has like, for me as a reader, very clear racist elements to it that you can't rip from the book because it was just the author's attitude. And so, I don't know. It's just interesting. Like, what is this compass? What is this ethical decision? What is this moral compass that you're following? And to me, there really isn't any. They're just following profits. So I'm going to end it here. I'll be really curious to hear people's thoughts on this topic, because I think it's something that everyone in the bookish world has some sort of opinion about. I'm sure there's a lot of points that I missed. I was kind of just spitballing, talking about this as I've been kind of thinking about it over the past few weeks. But anyway, that is all I have for this video. So until next time, happy reading.